Every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday. Tuesday, Casual Tuesday. Wednesday, Casual Hump Day. Thursday, Casual Thurs. That's what we call it. And Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, April 28th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, New York Times opinion columnist Jamelle Bouie will be joining us to look back on this rather news-filled week. Then we'll be hearing from Tim Heidecker of the Office Hour show about hopefully getting me an apology for accusations he made about my journalistic skills relative to now two departed really has-beens. First, also on the program, total abortion bans blocked in Nebraska and South Carolina as Republicans begin to fear voter backlash. Also on the program today, soon to be released Kavanaugh documentary with even more evidence that Kavanaugh's vetting deliberately short-circuited. Ron DeSantis facing questions of his involvement with Iraq torture regime. Democrats ramp up plans to highlight the Republican debt ceiling hostage budget cuts. Russian missiles kill at least 19 civilians in Uman, Dnipro, and Kyiv. And in the wake of Zoe Zephyr's being barred from the halls of the Montana legislature, the Montana governor's non-binary son calls on him to reject anti-trans bills. 2 U.S. Army helicopters crash in Alaska, killing 3 soldiers. New York City subway ends service alerts on Twitter after Elon Musk tries to extort $50,000 a month from them. Rest in peace, Jerry Springer. And also noting the death of Carolyn Bryant Denham. She died. She was the accuser of Emmett Till, who accused him of saying something lewd to her in a store. 14-year-old boy beaten, tortured, and lynched days later. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Casual Friday. Joining me, as always, Emma Vigeland. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Sam.
Okay.
That's all I've got.
All right.
I've got. Yeah.
Let's just say this up front so we can spare some IMs. Yes, we have seen the video that Steven Crowder's wife released. We will be talking about it later in the fun half. The video is a little bit disturbing. I don't know if we'll even play that, frankly. There's plenty of places to see it, but we will talk about it because there's some broader points to be made about the whole Steven Crowder scandal.
Sort of
and of course, what's that?
It's sort of a capstone moment for this Steven Crowder fella.
Let's hope it's a capstone. But there's still some people out there.
There's more to come. My guess is there's more to come.
I think there's more to come, and we'll talk about this obviously later. But I think that part of what his audience, or at least a portion of his audience, appreciates about him is that he has a fundamentalist, which is, a religious fundamentalist view is, it's possible that there's some fundamentalist religion out there that is not almost definitionally misogynist, but I'm not aware of it. I'll keep an open mind. It's possible, but certainly, fundamentalism is inherently misogynist. And he was trying to exercise a control over his wife that was, according to her, and from the video, at least emotionally and emotionally and psychologically abusive. But I think there's frankly part of Steven Crowder's audience that's not a bug, that's a feature of Steven Crowder. But we will talk more about that later in the program as we move on. We do have a lot of stuff to cover, but let's start with this sound. Some time ago, we mentioned on the program that I think this was in December, Mike Preisner from the Empire Files did an interview with, I believe it was someone who had been released from Guantanamo. Was it from Guantanamo?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
And they basically said that Ron DeSantis was brought down there, showed up there, and was involved in the torture of prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was Mansour Adayfi, and you can read this in the March 2023 issue of Harper's under the headline "See No Evil." He was a detainee, a former detainee at Guantanamo.
And was the interview was recounted in there? Is that it?
Harper's republished the section of the this Preisner piece.
And that has kind of sparked some digging from other outlets now more recently, like the Washington Post and the Guardian, and it's fleshing out. I mean, it seems irrefutable that he was present for this stuff and force feedings.
Well, his denial is like that he wasn't high-ranking enough to be doing torture stuff. Which
well, let's hear his. Let's hear.
Yeah.
He's asked this question, and then we can fill in some of this story. Here he is at a. This is him in Jerusalem. He is doing a world tour, ostensibly visiting all of the authoritarian governments he can, to get pointers maybe, and to share, I believe, he's got some, I think some of his campaign people are actually working over there at the moment. But here is Ron DeSantis being questioned in Jerusalem.
During your time at Guantanamo, did you witness any incidents?
No, none of all that's BS. No, totally BS.
Did you say you were present during force feedings? Is that
Who said that?
Detainees have told us.
How would they know me? Okay, think about that. Do you honestly believe that's credible? So this is 2006. I'm a junior officer. Do you honestly think that they would have remembered me from Adam? Of course not. They're just trying to get into the news because they know people like you will consume it because it fits your preordained narrative that you're trying to spin. Focus on the facts and stop worrying about narrative.
Pretty defensive. Nothing to see here.
Pretty defensive, and it's clear he was there.
Yeah,
I mean that's not in dispute at all, is it?
No,
he admits to being a junior officer there,
and his role was supposed to be there as someone who's there to oversee the military officers and guards and make sure that they were not committing any violations. That was his role on paper, but what was revealed, it seems, is that one of the prisoners said, "Can you please report the abuse to the higher-ups?" Asked him for it, and that's the one who says they recognize him. Seems like that didn't happen. And then the other said he was present for the force feeding protein shakes through tubes shoved up a prisoners' noses because they were on hunger strike because of the outrageous conditions. And then this morning, The Guardian says he was around when there were multiple prisoners who died at Guantanamo.
Think if you would remember the person who was in the room for this happening to you, right? Torture as a mechanism. This is from the Gaddafi interview with Preisner. Went on a massive hunger strike in 2005, and there was force feeding. It was torture. I saw a fucking handsome person come in, and he said, "I'm here to ensure that you're treated humanely." And Preisner says it was Ron DeSantis, and he says yes. And they said, I'm here to, like we said, like ensure that everything's being done, up to board here. And then what happened is Ron DeSantis was there watching. We were crying, screaming. We were tied to the feeding chair, and he was watching. He was laughing. Our stomachs could not hold this amount of Ensure. They were force feeding them with Ensure because of the hunger strike. They poured one can after another. So I would just say I'd probably remember that guy.
Yeah.
This just reading from the Guardian here. The future of Florida governor and Republican presidential contender had been assigned to Guantanamo 3 months earlier as part of a small legal team tasked with ensuring the guards and other military personnel followed the law. He was the most junior JAG in the camp, but after 3 deaths on the night of June 2006, his superior officer, Captain Patrick McCarthy, ordered him to start collecting initial evidence. It's unclear when exactly DeSantis became involved in the investigation. Some of the witness statements mention an unnamed JAG at the scene in the early hours of June 10th. McCarthy did not respond to a request for comment, but confirmed to the Post he had ordered DeSantis to gather information. I cannot tell you specifically what DeSantis did, but said his subordinate was probably, quote, involved in the facilitating access to information, trying to make sure that privileged information did not get swept up. He would have been one of the folks that I dispatched to help facilitate the investigative effort. I mean, the bottom line is, what's clear here is that none of this, as far as I know, none of this was reported publicly prior to the detainee from Guantanamo saying, I remember DeSantis from there because I remember when this guy became governor. And so, we know for a fact that DeSantis was there. And we know that there's no way this detainee could have known that unless he was aware of him being there during that time. So at the very least, in that denial that DeSantis had, DeSantis knows he is denying actual facts that are established. And the idea that the guy remembered him, we know that's the case here, because there's no way that guy could have known that DeSantis was there had he not remembered him there.
Yeah. And
now we have confirmation that he was there. And so really the question isn't whether this guy remembered DeSantis. The question is, did DeSantis do what this prisoner said he did? And DeSantis did not deny that. He denied that this prisoner remembered him. And we know, again, from this timeline, that the prisoner clearly did remember him. Now, maybe the prisoner has decided to make up what DeSantis did in that moment, which would be odd because you would expect someone who placed someone in that room as torture is basically happening. And if that person was helpful or defensive of the person being tortured, it's hard to imagine that that prisoner would turn around and implicate DeSantis. I think it's fairly basic human nature that if you're being attacked and someone is doing anything to inhibit that attack or even to not participate in it, you have a certain sort of I don't want to say affection towards that person, but it's hard to imagine that you would put that person out to dry. Yeah. This,
exactly. And
this better be pursued more. I hope
so.
Yeah.
But given how we've treated Guantanamo prisoners in this country up to this point, I don't have a ton of faith. But what's also interesting here is how DeSantis reacts when he's out of his comfort zone of Club for Growth fundraisers and handpicked kind of Florida media members at his press conferences where he can control the atmosphere. If he was smart, he would own it. If Trump was involved or a lawyer for one of the Guantanamo involved in that torture regime, he'd be like, yeah, I was doing what I could to protect my country. DeSantis just doesn't really meet the moment here, and he gets really defensive when he could have just had I did this to protect America. That would go over well with Republican primary voters.
Well, I mean, but he's got this problem, right? I mean, he's got this problem because he knows not necessarily going to go over with the rest of the country. In a moment, we'll be talking to Jamelle Bouie. First, a word from our sponsor today. One of my favorite sponsors. Actually, I use them every day, and that, of course, sunsetlakesebede.com. That's I need this thing. This one's a little faded. Left is best. We'll get you 20%
after some Sunset Lake.
Oh.
Oh my God. Matt's been giddy lately since he learned about the entourage effect. But sunsetlakesebede.com, 20% off with Left is Best. They have a great product line. They have tinctures with melatonin. They have gummies with melatonin, Sour Patch gummies. They have gummies with THC in addition to CBD. Incidentally, people always, people still, like newer listeners don't know why I say the words that way. It is because some of our platforms don't appreciate those letters being put together in a sentence.
Censorship.
Exactly.
The YouTube files.
Authoritarianism. But this is a company that has a tremendous amount of integrity, both in terms of their farming practices. They do regenerative farming. They use integrated pest management, which means no pesticides. They also have all of their products third-party tested. You can get those documents on the website. You can get it when you order stuff. They also have great business practices. $20 minimum wage, mostly employee-owned company. They also are movement partners. I don't know, last week, or I guess it was about a week ago, we finished they had a sale where they also dedicated 5% of their profits from that sale to the Last Prisoner Project, which does legal intervention and direct constituent support, advocacy campaigns, and policy change around the carceral policies involving cannabis. We also contributed 5% to that. These guys have spent thousands in the past supporting union strike funds and refugee resettlement and food pantries. The list goes on. And again, their products are great. I mentioned the tinctures. They have smokables. They have pre-rolls. They have keef. They have lotions with CBD. They have salves with CBD. They have fudge and coffee. Go check it out. Great company, great product. You're going to enjoy it. I use the tinctures and the gummies on a very regular basis, and the salve. I've got some weird rash here. I don't know what it is. I've been putting it on and has been soothing it. I don't know if it's clearing it up, but it's definitely been helping a little bit. And just all around great sponsor of the program. I love those guys, and I'm determined to get up there near Burlington, Vermont, sometime this summer. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, and Jamelle Bouie will be with us to talk about some of the big stories from this week. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. Joining us, Jamelle Bouie. He is, of course, the one of the columnists on the opinion page at New York Times. Jamelle, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we had a lot in the news this week, to the point where almost like I had forgotten that Joe Biden had announced his reelection campaign. We'll get to that in a moment. But let's talk about, you wrote a piece today, or published a piece today, I guess, about John Roberts' refusal to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There's a couple of issues actually involved in that, aside from both Clarence Thomas's ethical situation, Gorsuch's, and also continuing revelations that seem to be like there's still, this documentary seems to still be a work in progress, even though it showed at Sundance, with more evidence that the so-called investigation into Brett Kavanaugh was really no investigation whatsoever. So you've got all of these sort of these ethical issues involved there. You also have sort of the sideshow of Dianne Feinstein, who seems to be, who knows what's happening with that. We can talk about that in a moment. But what is your, there doesn't seem to be an end game for this, for the Supreme Court, because there's been a weird reluctance by the Democrats, particularly the leadership of the Democratic Party, to even contemplate the idea of some type of reform of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's strange, but I don't think it's inexplicable. I think it's a combination of generation. This is a generation of politicians, of liberals who are accustomed to the court being this almost sort of sacrosanct ground that is deserving of respect and whose legitimacy must be upheld. But then also there is, I think, fear of getting bogged down in some kind of political war without a particular end game. To which, my view is these revelations, and you can see it in the polling about the Supreme Court, these revelations have steadily eroded the Supreme Court standing with the public in ways that are it's kind of stunning to witness. It's not usual that you get to see an institution in American life go from 2/3 of Americans saying they trust it to something like a third saying they do. But that's been the story since the ruling in Dobbs last year. And these revelations about Supreme Court justices, if not being engaged in outright corruption, then at least having these suspect relationships and ethical entanglements that do demand real answers, because these people serve the public, they're not kings, has also led the general public, when asked, to say, we deserve answers. And so as far as Democratic leadership goes, the fear, I can kind of understand we don't want to rock the boat too much with the court generational thing, but the fear of a political confrontation I do find a little baffling, because if there's any ground on which it is a firm place to fight, it is one where you have an unpopular institution with staff with unpopular people pursuing unpopular policies, embroiled in a corruption scandal. Like that gives you an opportunity to maybe push for reforms if you believe reforms are necessary. And I do think that as these revelations come out, and you're right to say that it seems it's interesting drip. It's my own kind of not informed view here is that like there's a lot of this stuff with the court and reporters kind of just like smell blood. Right. And so they're going to continue kind of digging and prodding and seeing what falls out. But as long as this keeps coming out, there's going to be more and more political pressure, I think, being built, calls for some sort of court reform. Doesn't have to be drastic, but something to remind the court that it isn't actually, like, they aren't actually kings, right? They aren't actually, above the entire political system.
And we should say that there's been legislation introduced by Mazie Hirono, which is the Stop Judge Shopping Act, that deals with the federal judiciary, not with the Supreme Court, but the idea of judicial reform is in the air. It feels like, but So let me ask you this, and I want to just, I don't know, for good measure, I don't know that there's much to say about it. I would add to these sort of ethical issues the fact that I maybe I'm overstating the case, but it seems like it's quite obvious that Sam Alito or someone in his orbit leaked the Dobbs case. I mean, it just, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence in terms of, like, the Wall Street Journal getting a report on what was going on there and what happened in 2012 with the ACA, and the fact that they somehow don't have the ability to figure out who leaked it, which was frankly somewhat predictable in the event that it was a conservative, that someone aligned with Alito. But do you think, so let me ask you this, is the reluctance to engage in this when it's clearly a political winner, is the reluctance a function of the legal elite in this country have not come around? Like, it's true the American public, it perceives the Supreme Court, but having gone to law school for a year, having been raised by lawyers essentially all around me as a kid, knowing the sort of like sanctity that they hold the judiciary in, is it a function of like the legal voices around the administration, the senators, those people are reluctant to do this because they don't see the corruption in the Supreme Court? Or is it also, it could be an all bets are off type of situation where, like, we want reform, but we don't want too much reform.
Right.
We don't want Pam Harlan on the, Carlin on the Supreme Court or someone like that. You know what I mean? Like, are they worried about that process just getting away from them too much? Because lost in a lot of this conversation about the Supreme Court is all of the incredible pro-business, anti-government rulings that the reversal of the Chevron doctrine, the development of this new major questions doctrine, which is just basically we get to decide what we want to do.
If we don't like it, then it's a major question. Now you can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, how much of it is like, is your sense like where is what's the mixture there?
Yeah. I really think a considerable amount of it is just like the acculturation amongst like the liberal legal elite, like legal realism, right? This idea that like the court isn't really deciding based off of what the Constitution says, but it's mostly a function of like belief and ideology and these sorts of things, is not like a standard position, right, amongst the liberal legal elite. I think there's a real belief in the court as an institution, a real belief in constitutional law as a thing that can be used for good, a real belief in the legal system as a thing that does exist somewhat above politics. And I think it's genuinely, like, conceptually, culturally difficult for people who have really internalized those values to then say, well, maybe that's all wrong, right? Because if it's all wrong, and I do think a lot of it's quite wrong, then what have you been doing with your life, right? Like, how did you get fooled?
Right.
And I think that is a genuinely difficult thing to overcome, at least for like some of the voices and the people involved in all of this. I do think there's also a fear of just, I mean, like I said earlier, getting bogged down in a political fight. And I think that an older generation of Democrats and of liberals have a very different conception of political fights than maybe their younger colleagues do. I think their younger colleagues see political fights as being in some regard generative, right? That even if you don't win it, or even if there isn't necessarily like an end game, like fighting the fight itself, going through the process of the fight, making the argument itself, galvanizes your supporters, puts your opponents on the defensive. It does political work for you, even if it isn't necessarily clear that you're going to win. And I think that for an older generation of Democrats who were operating in an environment where sort of like Reaganism was hegemonic, where the Democratic Party was sort of like struggling to distance itself from liberalism, distance itself from any tinge of radicalism, I think for those Democrats, there's a real fear of getting into this kind of political fight over something that is relative to the past couple of decades of U.S. politics, kind of radical, like a direct fight with the Supreme Court over its composition and over its authority. And I think the feeling is that's just going to alienate people. It's going to make people think that we're not responsible, that we are just the flip side of the extreme right, et cetera, and we can't do that kind of thing. And I do think that is wrong. And I think it's wrong precisely because it's not the Democratic Party that would be going against the mainstream in this fight. It'd be a recognition of the court getting far outside the public and far outside the mainstream, in both in terms of its rulings and just in terms of its behavior. I think I saw a poll this morning that suggested that when you just like spelled out what Clarence Thomas did, not even what he's accused of or anything, but just sort of like, here are the facts of the case to Americans, like 2/3 are like, yeah, that guy should be impeached, because it's just like, it's obvious to people that you can't do stuff like that. And I think there's a political message to form around the kind of commonsensical observation that if you're a justice on the Supreme Court, one of the most powerful institutions in the country, then yeah, you can't be friends with billionaires anymore. Sorry. If you want to, get off the Supreme Court.
Also, it's possible that his friendship with the billionaire came after the Supreme Court. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not even like you've got to break up with your friends. It's like maybe you got to be a little more careful how you choose your friends. And Gorsuch not disclosing his real estate sales,
making $500,000 off of a real estate sale that had been languishing for 2 years, but suddenly is like he can sell it 9 days after he gets confirmed to the Supreme Court. It's like, even if there is an explanation for that, that's reasonable. You have to be an idiot to see that it doesn't look good.
Right.
And he didn't disclose it. That's why he didn't disclose that one particular sale. He discloses cowboy boots, but he doesn't disclose the $1.6 or $1.78 million property that he sells right after he becomes justice.
Right.
Getting back though to this notion of it being generational, because I mean, and people, I don't know if people remember this, but when Mike Dukakis ran for president, he was running from the label liberal, and not because it was perceived to be too right. I have to explain this to people who, to our audience who are, closer to your age. I mean, obviously, this is what you do professionally. You're aware of that, but I don't know that people understand sort of like how sort of bullied on some level. I think a lot of the mentality of the Democratic leadership at this time, they were raised in an era where they were just basically trained to be bullied. I guess the question then is it your sense that we will not see some type of reform until there is a generational change? I mean, just the what you said about legal realism, when I went to law school, which 30 years ago now, to take a critical legal studies course as an elective was literally the least credit-worthy option you had. Like it was like one of the few things you could do. I think like cleaning the library would get you more credits towards graduation than taking a critical legal studies class. And I don't know that that's changed really. Maybe it has to some degree, but what does that generational change? I would imagine there's something akin to it happening within the institution of law school. But do we have to wait for that? I mean, do we have to wait 15 years and, watch the Supreme Court essentially dismantle the administrative state?
So I think we may have to wait for generational change, although you never know. I mean, things can happen so rapidly in terms of how conditions on the ground change, how the politics of something change, that even without generational change in like the leadership of the Democratic Party, you might see action, in the next couple of years. But assuming that it's just going to be a steady drip of revelations about how out of sorts the court is in terms of its ethical behavior, I do think it's going to take generational change. But one thing I'd say is that generational political change is a little different than like generational age change, right? Like someone who has actually been quite aggressive on court reform, like Elizabeth Warren, is obviously she's in her 70s.
Right.
But like in terms of being a partisan political figure, she's a relatively recent newcomer to the stage and brings with her kind of like a political acculturation that's a little more recent than the 70s and the 80s. And I think that's kind of the difference. It's not so much that you have to wait for every 30 something to get in a position of power, but you have to look at like, where are people coming into their awareness of politics? For, I think, Democrats who came into their awareness of politics in the post-2008 era, their view of the Republican Party is just very different than people who came up when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill could come to a deal and, like, you know, work constructively.
And
for people... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, but I would add to, I think that like, and that perspective on Republicans, at least, I think is shared across the ideological spectrum within the Democratic Party, even.
Right. This is kind of the interesting thing. It's, you know, there's obviously a big ideological divide in the Democratic Party, and I don't want to downplay that. But I think we should also just like be attuned to just how people perceive their opposition as a divide as well. And even a moderate or centrist Democrat who nonetheless sees Republicans as bad faith actors is going to behave differently than a moderate and centrist Democrat who doesn't, right? Like that is a real distinction, and it shapes their behavior in like genuinely different ways. And so it's not even, again, it's not a question. I don't think it's necessarily a question of when the Democratic leadership is replaced by 30 somethings and liberals and progressives or whatever. Like, I don't think that's necessarily a thing that's going to happen anytime soon, but there very clearly is a distinction amongst Democratic lawmakers, among Democratic politicians, among those who basically have a clear memory of the 80s and 90s and those whose politics really stem from the 2000s and 2010s. And I think the latter group is going to have a much larger appetite for challenging something like the Supreme Court than the former group.
You would think, just even like introducing, we're going to have a code of ethics and come up with some, you know, relatively, even if it's, you know, just some board that could actually just even make a pronouncement, never mind actually enforce it in any way, but simply make an adjudication so that there is some objective standard as to like, this person's ethics are bad.
Right.
Like it can't be, I would imagine that would be the first thing that we're going to see is some like sort of, you know, both limiting the jurisdiction, if, you know, Democrats are in a position to do this, limiting the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court on certain topics, and also creating some type of ethical standards that are at the very least we can post on the bulletin board so that there continues to be more political pressure. Because, you know, John Roberts can sort of, you know, his legacy in his mind is still protected because this is just, you know, this is just liberal newspapers saying that it's wrong to take money from a billionaire or sell your property to someone who's coming in front of your court. But so let's talk about something else that happened this week. This is a big week for Tucker Carlson. He is no longer on Fox News. And, you know, I think you mentioned the idea of the value of losing fights, which was something that I think, and you were sort of part of that nascent blogosphere, or at least I you know, 15 years ago or so, and that was a big cri de coeur, if you will, of that blogosphere. It was like Democrats need to lose fights because there's value in engaging in the fight.
Right.
The other big thing was just sort of like, how do the media was structured in such a way at that time that Fox really had a tremendous, I mean, the impact is still big today, but it has a different impact than it did then. Then it was a gateway to sort of like ABC News, essentially.
Right.
It would go from Fox to Drudge to ABC News, and that was the game. Is it relevant that Tucker Carlson is no longer on air? Does that matter both from the perspective of like what Fox News brings and also the potential that he could end up just, I don't know, being online, you know, depending on what his contract with Fox said?
Yeah. So I tend to, I have been of the view that what was powerful about Tucker Carlson wasn't necessarily Tucker Carlson, but that the fact that he occupied the 8 p.m. slot at Fox. So, I am old enough to remember when Bill O'Reilly had the 8 p.m. slot on Fox and was an extremely influential person.
Yep.
And then he lost it because of a scandal. And who thinks of Bill O'Reilly anymore, right? Like, it doesn't really matter. And I kind of think something similar might happen to Tucker, that on account of losing that slot, not for really anything he said, but just because the bosses didn't like him very much anymore, which I think is an actually very important thing to note, because there's been some talk that, Tucker was fired because he was going against conservative orthodoxies in some regard, and he wasn't really. No. But then he wasn't fired for that. He was fired because I think Murdoch thought his wife wanted to be with him.
And also apparently some of the unredacted or the redacted text, I should say, from the Dominion lawsuit says stuff in it that, well, at least this is what they're saying, putting out publicly, that, there's a lot of worse stuff behind the scenes. So Tucker, right. Don't you go talking. I don't know what to believe in that way, but sorry, Jamel. Go ahead.
No, but I think it just to emphasize that, like, he was fired for basically internal politics, not so much for what he was saying on air. But my inclination to say that Tucker actually does kind of fade away a bit. To the extent that he doesn't, it might be because he did happen to make himself into something of an avatar for like that particular MAGA and nationalist perspective. But again, it's an 8 p.m. slot at Fox, and even then, it's not what it was. I think on Friday, Tucker's last broadcast, he brought in like 2.3 million viewers. It's like that's not really that many people. It's not. Having the largest news show on cable news used to mean that maybe you brought in 15 or 20 million people. Now it's a fraction of that. And to the extent that it's powerful, it's because of repetition, and not necessarily repetition throughout the broader media infrastructure atmosphere, but through conservative media. So Tucker would be repeated in all kinds of other conservative publications, on conservative radio and conservative podcasts, but not necessarily anywhere else. And in the absence of that amplification, I'm skeptical of how much reach and influence Tucker Carlson is going to have going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I for him, but for the value for Fox, I do think there is somewhat of a loss, at least temporarily, in that he was a connective tissue or a filter for like the 4chan, 8chan conspiracy theories, the white supremacist conspiracy theories, the Alex Jones crowd online, to a broader audience where like the halls of power are Fox News and the Republican propaganda machine. So it was that he saw that differently than Ingram or Hannity, right?
Right.
And I for the purposes of like Fox being as effective of a propaganda tool as it can be, them not having that, it might be at least a temporary loss for them.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I think that Tucker was at least influential enough within the conservative world that he could also be like exert a pretty powerful disciplining force on Republican politicians. Sorry, my Siri thing just went off. On Republican politicians. So that also matters. It matters that there's not someone there who necessarily, if they put your face up on prime time and yell at you, it's going to get your voters angry and like force you to react in some way. So I don't know. For me, it's like it's hard to predict and say going forward, like what is going to happen with Fox, right. What is going to happen with Tucker. But I would caution, at least for people who think Carlson is like some 800-pound gorilla of American politics, I would caution people and say that consider actually that his influence is much more a function of Fox's stature than really him at all.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Glenn Beck is still out there. He's making plenty of money with the Blaze, but it's not what it was when he was on Fox. Bill O'Reilly still has his thing. But it's not what it was when he's on Fox. Tucker Carlson's, 20-minute video that he put out, got much better numbers supposedly, or views on Twitter than what we saw on Fox News the other night. But those things are not those things are just simply not, they're apples and oranges. And, he could keep doing that. And Fox, they still technically have him under contract. They
Right.
could keep him off of the airwaves and maybe on regular, like off of like a video platform for until 2024, based upon what they end up negotiating. But it will be interesting to see if there is a fundamental change in the ecosystem. But I'm with you in the sense that like there's an imprimatur of just being on television that increases, if we're having the same conversation on ABC News versus on the Majority Report, it has a different import, and
Right.
not because of what we're saying, but
Right.
yeah, that's interesting. And I hate to even raise this, and maybe you're not even aware of it, but Steven Crowder also had some problems this week.
I did see some of that. Yeah.
And it's interesting, like it's just it is interesting to see sort of I wonder what is indicative of like the right-wing media system just sort of seems to be, there's no, for years Rush Limbaugh was like this tentpole. And even like Fox got some of its juice from Limbaugh. O'Reilly, when he was at his top of his game, went on to radio because Limbaugh had created that. There doesn't seem to be that sort of like, radio's still out there, but it doesn't seem to have the same, I don't know. I feel like there's some type of fundamental change in the right-wing media system. Part of it could be just because there doesn't need to be a star, because it's its own sort of like closed loop now, and they don't need the mainstream media, so they don't need like a big figure. It's self-sustaining.
I think that's right. I mean, I'm thinking about when Limbaugh was a host for like 2 nights on Monday Night Football. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Way back when.
Yep.
And then he said something incredibly racist, and they were like, we can't have this guy here, which you would have thought they would have figured that out before they hired him. But a testament to Limbaugh's mainstream penetration was that the producers of that show were like, let's get Rush Limbaugh on here as a regular commentator. And that you cannot imagine a mainstream, not even news, but sort of media organization reaching out to, say, Ben Shapiro and saying, come be a regular commentator. But then at the same time, he doesn't need it, because you're right to say that it's a sort of self-sustaining environment, a closed environment that has a large enough audience that you can make a good career within it, just pandering to that audience. But the problem, and I think the Crowder stuff is actually really illustrative of this, the problem is that the currency of the realm in this closed world it's not intellectual rigor. It's not facts, right? Like the ability to find new facts, bring new context or anything. The currency of the realm is just like vitriol and disdain and disparagement of your political enemies and all the ugly stuff of politics. And that itself selects for personalities, for people who aren't just playing a character, but might actually be pretty ugly themselves.
Right.
And that as well kind of like limits the reach beyond the closed world of the voices of those personalities. That's not to say that none of this is like inconsequential. It's consequential. It's like not a good thing that some significant percentage of Americans like marinate in all of this all day. But I do think it's important to like keep all these things in perspective and just consider how the closed world of conservative media is not really conducive to reaching out beyond its borders, either in terms of the people, the personalities involved, or the message. One of the other things that's been happening this week and last week too is kind of it seems to be total collapse of Ron DeSantis as a viable presidential candidate. And I think one explanation for it is that like he takes his cues from conservative media. And what plays and works for conservative media and the consumers of it is actually kind of weird and alienating to people who are just living their lives and minding their business with no real connection to that world.
That's undoubtedly true. I mean, that's undoubtedly true. I think it's the political ramifications of it have never been as close in proximity as the dynamic that you're describing here, with like just right-wing political media, because they're all just talking about trans kids and banning gender affirming care and book burnings and or bannings, I should say, whatever. These bizarre fixations that are also coming out of that same ecosystem, and there's no real crossover appeal to it whatsoever. I mean, I think that the fixation on DeSantis was like, all right, well, he can appeal to the crazies with this stuff, and he can be a creature of right-wing media, but also he went to Yale and he's someone we can control and he's not Trump. But that's not possible anymore. That's untenable in the Republican Party. And I think like that flame out also speaks to the messaging that Republicans are fixated on and how little that's going to help them in a general election.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
I called that the Bachman effect. Do you remember her response to Obama one year, the State of the Union, and she had a direct feed to the Tea Party with doing like the closed circuit TV, but CNN also put their camera there, and she was doing it to the Tea Party feed. And the CNN camera was coming in from here, and it just was one of the most bizarre looking things in the world. And it was the perfect metaphor for like, you just can't speak to both of those cameras simultaneously. They're just too far apart. And I think, DeSantis has he's either going to be Donald Trump light or there's no other lane for him there, right. I think, to win in that Republican primary. All right, let's just, briefly, I don't know, how much there is to say about Joe Biden's announcement this week, and I guess almost equally as well, not quite as relevant, but relevant at least in terms of the Democratic primary, is Bernie Sanders saying that he's not going to run. I don't think there was an expectation that he would, but it sort of was like maybe a capstone on some level of the idea of a material challenge to Joe Biden, at least within, the Democratic, the sort of broad definition of mainstream Democratic Party. We have Marianne Williamson, we have RFK Jr. RFK Jr.'s, name alone is going to get him some, at least do well in the polling initially. But what's your sense of this? I mean, it's, broadly, it just seems like people are nervous about Biden's age.
Yeah, I think in terms of challenges to Biden, I think it's sort of two things to think about. One, you're right, Biden's age. I think if you were 10 years younger, no one would either. There wouldn't even be these kind of vanity challenges. It would just be a foregone conclusion that he's going to win renomination without any touch of a challenge. So I think the age thing is there as well. I think, the fact that Kamala Harris is not necessarily the most popular figure amongst Democrats, or at least among sort of Democratic elites for that matter, also makes people kind of nervous. Like, is she going to be a drag on the ticket? Like, what's really going on with that? I think the other thing, so we're all kind of accustomed to thinking about the Republican Party as not really having any like firm leadership other than what can be offered by Trump. And so like part of the issue there is that like, if not Trump, then who is actually going to be the one to take the reins? And I actually think there's something of a similar issue in the Democratic Party that, barely beneath the surface is this, as we've kind of been talking about, this generational conflict, this ideological conflict within the party. But there's not really like any clear standard bearers for either sides of that. And there's no like presumptive leader of the Democratic Party should Biden leave the stage. It's all sort of open and contested. And I think there's enough nervousness about winning a second term, about keeping Trump out of the White House, that kind of the general unstated consensus is that, all right, Biden's been doing a pretty decent job. Let's just go with Biden. Let's just like keep going with Biden, because that is the thing we settled on in 2020, and that appears to still be working. And if it isn't him, then who is it really going to be?
Right. There's no other
anyway?
options. That's, I mean, like largely there's no other options. In terms of, there may be policies of, some of the issue-oriented candidates that are running that I like more, but they don't have an opportunity. There's no evidence at all that they can win, never mind the Democratic primary or the general election. There doesn't seem to be, not only does it not seem to be like sort of like anybody on the bench to be a younger Biden, as it were. There doesn't seem to be anybody like on the bench yet, or who's like considered the titular leader of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
I think so. If Biden loses, obviously there's going to be like open warfare, right? But if Biden wins, and there's at this point, it's like 50-50. He could win, he could lose. It's hard to say. But if Biden wins re-election and serves out 4 years, it's at the end of that we're really going to see the contest for like the Democratic Party go forward. And the interesting thing to me is that even there, I mean, you might think, well, Biden, 8 years of a moderately liberal president, kind of centrist, would set up the moderately liberal centrist wing of the Democratic Party to really take the reins. But the interesting thing about the Biden years has been the extent to which he has included progressives for the most part as like a co-equal governing partner. Like there hasn't been a lot of trying to distance himself from progressives. And I think Bernie's endorsement, or it's deciding not to run at the very least, is like a testament to that. Like Bernie has a voice in this coalition. It's listened to, it's taken seriously. And even for all the friction and conflict that there's been, it's not really, this hasn't been Clinton part 2, right? This hasn't been Bill Clinton part 2, where what existed of a progressive wing was just shut out completely, like no say whatsoever.
Or Obama.
I was about to say, or Obama, where the progressive wing was not completely shut out, but was certainly not anywhere near the center of decision making. At least under Biden, the progressive wing has been somewhere near the center of decision making. And so the extent to which Biden has been trying to hold this coalition together by sort of like including people also sort of means that when he's gone, there's no real clear of the ideological wings. There's like not a clear leading, wing there. And it really is truly open. And I do think that, again, if he wins, if he serves his 4 years, we'll see a real fight for who's going to lead the Democratic Party. And I do think there are people in the Senate, in the governorships. There are people out there who could make a real claim to trying to lead the various wings of the party, trying to lead the party. But it's going to be a real contest in a way that there really hasn't been in the Democratic Party in some time, because we've gone kind of from Obama, and then, for much of the party, Clinton was the obvious standard bearer. But if it wasn't going to be Clinton, it was probably going to be Biden then too, and then to Biden. And now with it, when he's off the stage, it really will be fully open in a way it hasn't been since I would say 2008, right? Or 2004.
But even in 2008, you had like Clinton was the presumptive front runner a year or two, like in 2006 she was the presumptive front runner, it seems to me. And so but I guess we'll see. Jamelle Bouie, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on. We'll link to your last couple of pieces in the Times. If folks aren't aware of the New York Times, we will, but I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, folks. We're going to I guess we don't even need to take a break, do we? No. I think we have our next guest, Tim Heidecker, on, who is going to address, I'm anticipating, frankly, an apology. And so we've had him on in the past. I went on his show. I don't want to go through the whole history of this, but I was on his show. He made some comments about how much he thought I should be more like Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo. two people now off the air because of both ethical issues and sort of really some inappropriate statements that I thought. But I wanted to give this guy an opportunity to both apologize and to explain himself. He is the host of Office Hours Live. I get confused because I feel like there's been a bunch of shows called that, or movies or something. Office Hours. Tim Heidecker, are you there?
Hello.
Hello. Are you there? I understand you don't have a computer or something, so you had to call in.
No, I'm out living life and doing stuff and taking meetings and on my way to actually a pretty big lunch. But I wanted to call in because you called me out the other day, mispronounced my name. Which
I'm sorry about that. That happens.
Well, it's Tim Heidecker, CK, not GG. You're connecting me to a German philosopher from the 19th century, and I don't appreciate it.
Well, let me apologize for that. That is a massive category error, without a doubt.
And maliciously.
Heidegger was obviously a brilliant man, and I'm sorry for confusing you with him.
As to what you were talking about, to me, it's true. I'm a big fan of Don Lemon, and we did sort of talk about how I thought that you could do a better job of hosting a news show, a daily news show, and you should look to somebody like Lemon as a marker for what you could aspire to become. So yes, I'm disappointed that CNN let go of Don Lemon. I think he was a really big part of why I watch CNN, and same for Chris Colombo. But well, that's a little bit old news, but.
Right. Yeah, I think you'll find it's Chris Cuomo, and you said that I should aspire to be both of them. Chris Cuomo was let go because of ethical violations.
Well, I don't know I don't know the details of that. All I know is I can watch Chris Cuomo.
Chris Cuomo. Yeah.
So I can watch him every night of the week now on Newsnight. I don't know if you're following him on Newsnight. It's a great network, news network. It's similar to CNN. It's the same Cuomo that I loved on CNN. I could watch him. He was sparring with what's his name, Piers Morgan the other night. It was terrific. So whatever. If I'm watching it on CNN or Newsnight, or if I'm watching Fox or MSNBC, I want to get the guys I like and find out where they're going to go. I think Don Lemon's not going anywhere. I think we're going to find him, maybe over at Fox or MSNBC or Now This, or maybe he'll start the Lemon Network. I don't know.
But I mean, don't you feel?
I think he's a great journalist. And I think if you don't see that there's something wrong with you, not me.
All right. Well, I mean, you don't feel that like when Don Lemon says, Nikki Haley is past her prime as a woman because she's in her 40s or her 50s, let me just finish, Mr. Heidecker.
Listen,
Don's got. Hey, whoa. And Chris Cuomo, who was basically, advising his politician brother on how to avoid all the scandals he had and not disclosing that to the audience. I mean, don't you think that that maybe you owe me a bit of apology to say that I am so bad at my job that I should aspire to both a guy who says inappropriate sort of misogynist things on air, or one who has deep ethical, problems?
Okay, you done with the filibuster? Listen, here's what you need to understand. Don and Chris and, even somebody like Richard Quest, who I love. And I hope Richard Quest gets that morning spot now that Dom's left. I hope Richard Quest gets the opportunity to rise.
I don't know who Richard Quest is. I really don't know who that is. I don't know who that is. That's not the point.
Richard, you don't know who Richard Quest is. He often covers royalty on CNN. For a while, he was covering, I think, space. He covers the royal family in England.
Yeah, I
You
don't
know Richard
follow
Quest.
that.
Wait a minute, Sam. You're in journalism. You're in news. You don't know Richard Quest.
I just don't have any interest in the monarchs of a different country.
Okay, let me ask you this. Do you know Gary Tuchman?
I don't know Gary Tuchman.
Okay. All right. Okay, this is nuts. These are two stars at CNN. And I don't know that, if you don't know them, then how are you going to talk about Don Lemon? How are you going to talk about Chris
Well, because I
Cuomo
know Don
with any
Lemon
kind
and I
of-
know Chris Cuomo. I don't need to know other B-list or C-list people at CNN. I don't need to know the people on Entertainment Tonight, where apparently you get most of your news, to make a comment on, obviously, a story about someone who was a journalist without any ethics and a journalist who was saying misogynist things. I mean, these are the waters you swim in,
right.
Tim, and it really, you should be embarrassed. You really should be.
Well, no, you should be embarrassed because you don't know who Richard Quest or Gary Tuchman is. But that's
I think you should be embarrassed for knowing who those people are.
Here's what you need to understand about Don Lemon, and here's what you need to understand about Chris Cuomo. These are two guys that have something that you don't. It's called swag. It's called attitude. It's called understanding how to work the moment in an interview. And of course, they're going to say stuff that's going to rile you people up. Of course, they're going to shake things up where you become sort of disconnected from what you get. It's exciting. It's fresh, and that's going to rattle you people. I get that, but there's not been a better broadcaster of news and information the past 25 years than Don Lemon, and you're not seeing the last of him. He's going to rise to the top, and you're going to see him. I don't know what's going to do next, but I can't wait.
So you're sitting with bated breath for what Dom Lemon, as you call him, is going to do next. What's your biggest hope?
I can't listen. Let me just say something. This isn't a partisan thing. I love it all. I love Tucker Carlson. I thought he did a great job broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of Rachel Maddow and the All In with Chris Hayes. Great show. I love the Fox and Friends in the morning. I love the Morning Joe. I mean, I love all these things for different reasons.
How do you watch all of these programs that are actually on at the same time? You record them? You record them and watch them later?
I do record. Yes, I have my DVR, my TiVo set I watch Fox and Friends live, and I record Morning Joe. And then I was watching the CNN This Morning until Don Lemon got fired. And then now I'm watching Fox and Friends. And at night I do Hannity, and then I tape Maddow, and I tape Jake Tapper, and I watch that stuff in the morning before Morning Joe.
Tim, that's a lot of news. That's a lot of news. That's a lot of news. And hi, Tim. It's Emma over here.
Yeah. Hey, how are you?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot out of it. I get a lot of information, of course. I get a lot of different perspectives on what's going on in the world, and I get different sides of the same story, which I think is helpful. It makes me a broader, more open-minded person, I think. I'll watch Laura Ingraham, and then I'll switch over to MSNBC. I'll get some Chris Jansen. I love Lawrence O'Donnell. I love The Last Word. That's kind of how I end the night, with a little punctuation at the end. Say, he's somehow able to contextualize the whole day's worth of news
and give you the last word. Yeah, no, it's in the title of he gives you the last word. I get that because that's in the title of the show. Yeah, and so something that Laura Ingraham might have said earlier that I caught that sort of took me by surprise, or I didn't agree with. Lawrence is there to kind of. Is there any news shows that you don't watch? I mean, honestly, at this point, it doesn't seem like you're terribly discriminating. You don't care about ethics. You don't care about the sources of your news. It doesn't. it seems like your only care is that you get enough, like, sort of like, I don't know, monarchy watching. And otherwise your day is unfulfilled. I mean, and frankly, I got a question. I've seen, I'm not really much of, is it office hours? Is that what it is? Live office hour?
Yeah.
Live
Office. It's not. You're trying too hard to make it sound complicated. It's not at all. It's office hours live.
Okay,
words.
all right. I just didn't. No, I said live office hour. It was 3 words. I just got them because frankly, it doesn't make any sense one way or the other. So it's not obvious.
It's not. It's Sam. Here's a way to think about it. It's not a pun on a Steven Spielberg sci-fi movie. That's one way to think about it.
Yeah. Well, this, first of all, literate people know that what you're talking about is a Philip K. Dick book. It wasn't a Steven Spielberg movie. I don't even know if that had come out at that time when we first doing the Majority Report. It's not a pun on that whatsoever. Minority Report is a pun on Majority Report. It's not the other way around. So, but like I say, there's no there's no context in which office hours live means anything more than live office hours. I mean, I've heard both phrases. Both phrases, frankly, are meaningless, and I think that's reflected in some of the content that you both consume and then regurgitate.
All right. I don't really care what you think about anything. That's why I don't generally watch your show.
Well, I think it's mutual. I was understood. I understood that. Like, where to put that. There was a sense that people had that you would apologize in the wake of your 2 favorite newscasters getting fired for both ethical and sort of like inappropriate reasons. But apparently that's not the case. And I think I'm not frankly surprised.
All right, Sam, listen, I got Victor Blackwell on the screen right now. I'm watching, I got CNN on. He looks like he's about to do an interesting story about what's going on out there with this debt ceiling. So I'm probably going to jump off and tune back in. And later after lunch, I'm going to catch up with Ari Melbar and see what he's been cooking up, what reports he's working on.
Ari Melbar, I believe, is on at night. I don't know where, what TV system you live in, but God bless. Go with God, I guess, as you say.
Yeah, and by the way, Tom Foreman is somebody you should check out too. And I think that we're going to be in about an hour. I got something coming up from Dana Bash, so great. I'm going to be focused on that. All right.
Great. Well, I think people got a real sense of what your media appetite is, and I imagine it's made some people nauseous. But I appreciate you coming on under really, in many respects, false pretenses. So thank you for coming on.
All right.
Yep.
All the best, and Emma, nice to speak with you. All the best to you. Have a great weekend.
Same to you, Tim. Wow.
Yeah. Tim.
Glad we got something positive.
You know what?
Not to be confused with someone who actually achieved a lot in the realm of philosophy and thought and public intellectualism.
Can I speak?
Yes, sorry. I'm sorry. I was just giving you an outro, but
no,
go
you're
ahead.
just talking over praise for me. I mean, which is kind of par for the course.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Emma, you seem like a nice, smart person. I hope the people at CNN or MSNBC are watching, because I think there's a real opportunity for you to level up and have an opportunity there now that there's some open slots.
Thanks, Tim.
And all the best. And I'd love to see you, honestly, would love to see you out there with Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper on the New Year's Eve spectacular they do. I was a little disappointed because this year they were not allowed to drink, which I think kind of spoiled some of the fun. But I could imagine you out there with those guys laughing it up and having a good time in Times Square. But anyway,
that's really been percolating, hasn't it, for the past literally 5 months? That I believe that broadcast happened almost literally 5 months ago to the day.
I'm still not over it.
And apparently that still riled you. It gives you a good sense. Too bad there wasn't a Monarch report on that night too. Tim Heidecker, not to be confused with Heidegger, who was a brilliant philosopher in any way, someone who contributed something to the public discourse. I will not make that mistake again. Goodbye. Well, that was.
Well, I liked him a lot.
My understanding is he does.
Sam has Emma has a fantasy team of minor CNN stars and how much airtime they get. She's big on the.
I have no doubt that there's been bets
Exactly.
you've placed on that in the past. Well, all right, we're going to take a break as a palate cleanser. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. But we will take a quick break and head into the fun half.
Yeah.
That didn't work out well.
No, well, he sees my talent.
Someone's reminding me that Heidegger was a literal Nazi.
Yeah, actually
Oh.
a Nazi. I mean, look, Being in Time, good book, but his politics, not so good.
Yeah, no, I wasn't judging his politics, but he did have an impact on thing, and I didn't mean in any way to confuse Tim Heidecker with Tim.
Now you got to apologize
Heidecker.
to Tim on Office Hours Live.
Well, I wasn't calling him that. I wasn't saying that part of
Just
Heidegger.
loosely associated.
Well, I mean,
with him.
he likes the CNN monarchists, and you apparently approve of Heidegger. So.
Whew.
Well, folks, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only support the show, you get the free half free of commercials, and you get the fun half, and you can IM the show via our free app at majorityapp.com. Also, join the Discord. We got over 8,000 people on the Majority Discord, majoritydiscord.com. Don't forget AM Quickie. Sign up for the AM Quickie 3 times a week. It's free 3 times a week. Get paid for 5 times a week, but check it out. 3 times a week, you will get an email in your inbox in the morning and give you all the news you need quickly. That's why we call it the AM Quickie. JustCoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. All this week, 30% off. 30% off. No coupon code necessary. Buy the Majority Report blend. Emma, what's happening on ESVN this week?
Well, the draft was last night. Very exciting draft. I did a mock on ESPN on Monday. You can check it out. What I got wrong and what I got right. Much more what I got wrong. But I still gave, some analysis of a lot of the top picks that happened last night and some NBA, NHL talk. YouTube.com/ESPN show.
Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, Left Reckoning on Tuesday. We talked about Andrew Tate with Elias Cepeda. This weekend, I'll be doing a little deep dive with David into the House Freedom Caucus of North Dakota, which is voting to, did like 10 anti-trans bills one day, voted to not do universal school lunches, but voted to raise their lunch reimbursements, issue that they said was entirely unrelated. I'm going to go into one of their little guys. He's like just out of high school, a little Republican who was on a racist Facebook group called the North Dakota Young Republicans and tried to and also he is unclear about if he actually went to college or not. So a little bit of a Santos vibe going on. We'll be going into this Pritchard boy, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
All right, quick break. Head into the fun half. 646-257-3920. We'll take a couple of phone calls. Can't take too many, but we will take some. We'll be right back.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflakes has what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
ever see white people doing drugs that look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them. Fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what? A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Ooh, Worcester Ice Cats. Got to give a shout out to all my aunts, uncles, and cousins who power the Worcester Public Schools, including at your alma mater, Doherty High, fighting for a fair contract and potentially preparing for a strike. Exciting.
Wow.
Oh, that is exciting. They're building a new Doherty High. I mean, Worcester Ice Cats obviously knows this. It's a huge building. The school was relatively old when I went there, and they've been, it's obviously been high school for at least 40 years prior to that. But I've also, I don't know. They should put some money into the teachers. That might be a good idea too. Couple of clips here. We mentioned earlier, a lot going down in Montana. Zoe Zephyr, what was the official what did they end up finally doing in terms of I know she is is in the building.
Yeah, they've expelled her essentially from the floor. So she can still vote and things like that, but they've canceled her. They have silenced her speech, so she doesn't have the ability to speak.
And this is all because she won't apologize for saying correctly that if by passing these sort of anti-trans affirming care bills, they have blood on their hands.
And which is amazing.
Yeah.
It really is amazing that they're getting away with this. She is still working in the building. I've seen, I guess she is basically in the public galley section, so that she can, follow votes. She can still vote, but she just can't be
can't speak.
The body.
Her speech is so threatening to them that they had to silence her, which is just, their hypocrisy knows no bounds, but this takes the cake.
Apparently, on a Wednesday of this week, David Gianforte, who uses he and they pronouns, said he sat down with his father, Governor Greg Gianforte. This is a guy who body slammed a reporter as a way of showing his bona fides when he was running for office, to give him a statement to basically say, stop these anti-trans bills, essentially, because I have trans friends and non-binary friends, and Dad, please, And he claims basically that Gianforte is, realizes he'll be excommunicated from the Republican Party if he doesn't follow through. Here is just to give you a sense of like how bat crap crazy these people are. They want to protect the children, according to them, which is why they are trying to ban trans-affirming care. And here is a Montana rep, Kerry Seekins Crow, who has an odd sense of what constitutes protecting the children or her children.
One of the big issues that we have heard today and we've talked about lately is that without surgery, the risk of suicide goes way up. Well, I am one of those parents who lived with a daughter who was suicidal for 3 years. Someone once asked me, wouldn't I just do anything to help save her? And I really had to think. And the answer was no. I was not going to give in to her emotional manipulation because she was incapable of making those decisions, and I had to make those decisions for her. I was not going to let her tear apart my family, and I was not going to let her tear apart me because I had to be strong for her. I had to have a vision for her life when she had none, was incapable of having none. I was lost. I was scared. I spent hours on the floor in prayer because I didn't know that when I woke up, if my daughter was going to be alive or not. But I knew that I had to make those right decisions for her so that she would have a precious, successful adulthood at that time.
She called her daughter's mental crisis emotional manipulation, and the fact that she was either at risk of attempting suicide or had attempted. You're manipulating me.
It's pretty impressive to say that we've got to protect the kids, despite the fact that there's data that shows. Despite this data, I'm going to make the decision that will increase the risk of my child being suicidal and perhaps committing suicide to maintain my dogmatic religious fundamental belief system.
Yeah.
It wasn't clear if she's referring to her child being suicidal because her child was wanted to transition. So I didn't want to misgender the child earlier. I just.
The language is clear.
Right.
But she said, had that been the situation, we don't know if it was or not. Had it been the situation, not interested.
If that was the one thing to save my child's life. And like she can tell, like the way she continues, you can tell she thinks that no is not a great place to stop. And so she tries to make it sound better. But the way she says, like, I wanted to make sure she had a precious, successful adult life, or none at all, I guess, or no adult life. Like not as a trans person, that is not precious or successful in her eyes. So I guess dead.
And that's why, like, when we talk about this, I always return to this concept of, like, this is parental narcissism. This is, I have a vision for your life. It's very narrow. It's going to be what I envision for it, or I'm okay with losing you if that's the case, because it's not about your life. It's not about your agency. This is about you being an extension of me. And like the idea that is so widespread among parents in this country, that there's like a whole political movement that's pushed by that impulse, is deeply upsetting.
I think there are certainly circumstances where it is narcissism. But I really do think that what is driving this is a religious fundamentalism.
That too.
And maybe there's, maybe the distinction, maybe it's a difference without a distinction.
Yeah, right.
Right. I mean, exactly. And I think that the driver, it allows them and also other members of the family. I mean, this is the difference, right? Because it's not just one narcissistic parent. It is an entire worldview that the definition of a precious and successful